and it's a story that was told almost 1700 years ago by a man named Augustine. As a young man, Augustine was brilliant, ambitious, and full of life. He moved from his small hometown in North Africa to the bustling city of Carthage, and later to the heart of the Roman Empire itself, Milan. He was on the fast track to success. He was a master of rhetoric, a public speaker and teacher whose words could captivate any audience. He was chasing all the things the world told him would make him happy: fame, wealth, and recognition. He dove headfirst into a life of pleasure. He attended the games, enjoyed the theater, and threw himself into parties. He entered into a long-term relationship with a woman he never married, and together they had a son. On the outside, it looked like he had it all. He was young, successful, and living life to the fullest. But on the inside, there was a deep, gnawing emptiness. He was searching for happiness, but he couldn't find any lasting peace. His heart was restless. Augustine wasn't ignorant of the truth. In fact, he was actively searching for it. He explored different philosophies and religions, always looking for something that would finally satisfy the longing in his soul. His mother, Monica, a devout Christian, prayed for him constantly. He even admired the sermons of the great Bishop of Milan, Ambrose. He intellectually knew the truth of the Christian faith. He could see its beauty and its logic, but his heart wasn't ready. In his famous autobiography, Confessions, one of the most honest books ever written, Augustine looks back on this time in his life with unflinching clarity. He describes his internal struggle, the war between his mind and his desires. He famously prayed a prayer that perfectly captures this conflict. He wrote that he would ask God, "Give me chastity and self-control." But then he would add a little whisper, a little caveat, ... but not yet. He was like someone who wants to wake up but keeps hitting the snooze button. He knew the sun was up. He knew it was time to start the day, but the comfort of his current life was just too hard to leave behind. He wanted to be good, but he also wanted to enjoy his sins just a little bit longer. This battle raged within him for years. He was torn apart by his own desires. He wanted freedom, but he was a slave to his habits. He wanted peace, but his life was a storm of ambition and indulgence. He felt trapped, knowing the cure for his soul sickness, but refusing to take the medicine. It's a powerful and deeply human story about the struggle to change, the gap between knowing what's right and actually doing it. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacle in our path isn't a lack of knowledge, but a lack of will. But for Augustine, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a profound transformation that would change not only his life, but the course of Western history. Have you ever felt lost, like you're searching for something, but you don't even know what it is? That's exactly where a young man named Augustine found himself almost 1700 years ago. He wasn't just drifting through life. He was on intense, passionate quest for truth. He was brilliant, ambitious, and deeply restless. This wasn't a casual hobby for him. It was the driving force of his entire being. His journey first led him to the world of philosophy. Imagine ancient libraries filled with scrolls, the air thick with debate. Augustine dove headfirst into the works of the great thinkers. He loved the logic, the arguments, the pursuit of wisdom. He thought that by mastering human reason, he could figure out the meaning of everything. Philosophy sharpened his mind, making him an incredible debater and a powerful intellectual. But there was a problem. The more he learned, the more he felt a growing sense of pride. He felt superior to others because of his knowledge, yet deep down, something was missing. The answers he found felt hollow, like beautiful, empty rooms. Philosophy gave him tools to think, but it didn't give his soul a home. Feeling that philosophy alone wasn't enough, Augustine's search took a new turn. He was drawn to a popular and mysterious religious movement of his time called Manichaeism. This wasn't your typical religion. The Manichaeans claimed to have secret, exclusive knowledge about the universe. They had a compelling story about a cosmic battle between a kingdom of light and a kingdom of darkness. They believed the material world, including our bodies, was part of this darkness, while our souls were trapped sparks of divine light. To a young, searching Augustine, this explanation for good and evil seemed incredibly sophisticated and profound. It felt like he was being let in on a huge secret. For nearly a decade, Augustine was a committed Manichaean. He rose through their ranks, becoming a teacher and a strong advocate for their beliefs. He was part of an exclusive club, one that promised enlightenment and a clear path to salvation by understanding these hidden truths. It all sounded so good, but over time, cracks began to appear in this perfect worldview. He started asking questions, tough questions that his Manichaean teachers couldn't answer. He noticed contradictions in their teachings and a lack of scientific rigor in their explanations of the natural world. The promised secret knowledge started to feel more like an elaborate fantasy. The truth he was so desperate for seemed to slip through his fingers. Philosophy had filled him with pride, but left him feeling spiritually empty. Manichaeism had offered him a community and what seemed like profound secrets, but it ultimately left him disillusioned and broken. He had tasted knowledge without grace, and it was a bitter experience. His heart was still restless. This relentless search for truth had led him down two major paths, and both ended up being dead ends. He was more lost than ever, but his journey was far from over. In fact, this period of intense searching and disappointment was setting the stage for the biggest transformation of his life. Ever felt like you were running from something, only to find it was exactly what you needed? That's the story of a young man named Augustine. In the year 384, Augustine arrived in Milan. He was brilliant, ambitious, and running a prestigious school of rhetoric. On the surface, he had it all. But inside, he was restless, searching for a truth he couldn't quite grasp. His journey so far had been a whirlwind of philosophies and worldly pleasures, none of which brought him lasting peace. He thought he had left his past behind, including the persistent faith of his mother, Monica. Milan, for him, was a career move, a step up the ladder of Roman society. He was looking for fame, for influence, for intellectual satisfaction. He wasn't looking for God. But sometimes what we're not looking for finds us anyway. In Milan, Augustine started attending the cathedral, not out of any spiritual hunger, but for professional reasons. He wanted to study the speaking style of the city's famous bishop, Ambrose. Ambrose was a master orator, a former governor turned church leader, and his reputation was legendary. Augustine, the professional rhetorician, went to critique, to analyze, to learn the secrets of Ambrose's persuasive power. He was there to study the messenger, not the message. He would sit in the back, listening with a critical ear, dissecting the bishop's cadence, his arguments, his use of language. He was impressed, no doubt. Ambrose was even more eloquent than the teachers Augustine had admired his whole life, but he planned to keep a safe distance from the content of the sermons, separating the beautiful words from the Christian faith they carried. But something unexpected happened. As Augustine listened week after week, the words of Ambrose began to break through his intellectual defenses. For the first time, Christianity didn't sound like simple fables for the uneducated. Ambrose presented the faith with profound intellectual depth. He interpreted the Old Testament not just literally, but allegorically, revealing layers of meaning that Augustine had never considered. Suddenly, the scriptures, which Augustine had once dismissed as crude and unsophisticated, sounded deep, coherent, and wise. Faith, as Ambrose explained it, wasn't a blind leap in the dark. It was reasonable. It was intelligent. It engaged the mind as much as the heart. The very objections Augustine had held against Christianity for years began to crumble, not through force, but through Ambrose's thoughtful, compelling exposition. While Augustine's mind was being challenged in the cathedral, his mother Monica was waging a different kind of battle, one of prayer. She had followed him to Milan, her heart heavy but her hope relentless. For years, she had watched her brilliant son wander, chasing philosophies that left him empty and living a life that grieved her deeply. But she never gave up. Her days were filled with fasting, her nights with tearful prayers. Friends would try to comfort her, and one bishop famously told her, "Go on your way. It is impossible that the son of these tears should be lost." Monica clung to that promise. Her faith wasn't loud or confrontational. It was a quiet, unwavering current of love and hope flowing towards her son, a spiritual lifeline he wasn't even aware of. Every sermon Augustine heard from Ambrose was amplified by the silent, powerful prayers of his mother. Augustine's world was slowly turning upside down. The intellectual pride that had been his shield for so long was beginning to crack. He was drawn to Ambrose not just as a speaker, but as a person. He saw a man who was busy, influential, yet deeply serene and accessible. But Augustine was still hesitant, trapped between his old life and the new possibility Ambrose represented. He was reading the works of Greek philosophers, trying to find intellectual solutions to his spiritual problems. He was still wrestling with his desires, with the habits and relationships that held him captive. He could see the truth, he could admire it from a distance, but he felt powerless to embrace it. He was caught in a painful limbo. God was at the door, knocking, but Augustine was still afraid to open it. The final battle would have to be fought not in his mind, but in the very depths of his heart. God was closer than Augustine realized, preparing him for a moment of surrender that would change not just his life, but the course of history. Have you ever felt completely stuck, trapped by your own habits and desires, knowing you should change but feeling powerless to do so? If so, you're not alone. One of the greatest thinkers in history, a man named Augustine, felt the exact same way. His story is one of struggle, desperation, and a sudden, life-altering breakthrough that echoes through the centuries. Before he was St. Augustine, he was just Augustine, a brilliant but restless young man living in the late Roman Empire. He was a master of rhetoric, a celebrated professor, and a man who chased every pleasure the world had to offer. He had a brilliant mind, but his heart was in turmoil. He knew there was more to life, a deeper truth he couldn't grasp. He explored different philosophies, from Manichaeism to Neoplatonism, searching for an answer, for peace, but nothing satisfied the deep ache in his soul. He wrote about this time in his famous book, Confessions. He describes being a slave to his own desires. He wanted to be good, he really did, but he felt like he was two different people living in one body. One part of him longed for purity and truth, while the other was dragged down by earthly habits. He famously prayed, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet." Does that sound familiar? Wanting to change, but also wanting to hold on to the familiar comforts of our brokenness just a little bit longer. He was torn apart by this internal war, exhausted by his own sin and his inability to break free. This brings us to a garden in Milan in the year 386. Augustine is 31 years old. He's at his breaking point, sitting under a fig tree, weeping in bitter despair. He's intellectually convinced of the truth of Christianity, thanks to the powerful preaching of Bishop Ambrose and the stories of other conversions he's heard. But he can't make the final leap. He feels bound by invisible chains, held captive by his past. His will is paralyzed. He beats his chest, tears his hair, and cries out to God, "How long? How long? Tomorrow and tomorrow? Why not now? Why not this very hour an end to my uncleanness?" It's in this moment of absolute desperation that something extraordinary happens. Suddenly, from a nearby house, he hears the sing-song voice of a child, repeating a simple phrase over and over, "Tall, liege, tall, liege." In Latin, that means, "Take up and read, take up and read." At first, he wonders if it's part of some children's game he doesn't know, but then a thought strikes him like a lightning bolt. He interprets the voice as a divine command from God, telling him to open the scriptures and read the first passage he sees. He rushes back to where he had left his friend Alypius and the book of the Apostle Paul's letters. He snatches it up, opens it, and his eyes fall on a passage in the book of Romans, chapter 13, verses 13 and 14. He reads in silence, "Let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh." And in that instant, everything changed. As he finished the sentence, he wrote that a light of serenity infused his heart, and all the darkness of doubt vanished. The chains didn't loosen. They didn't fall off one by one. They shattered. In that single moment, the war inside him was over. The desire to sin, the hesitation, the internal conflict, it all disappeared. He wasn't just intellectually convinced anymore. His heart was captured. He had found his peace. He had found his freedom. He closed the book, his face calm, and told Alypius what had happened. His life was never the same. Augustine's story is so powerful because it's a story of grace. It wasn't about him finally trying hard enough or figuring it all out. It was about him reaching the end of himself and, in that moment of surrender, allowing a power greater than himself to do what he never could. His dramatic conversion in the garden marked the beginning of his journey to becoming one of the most influential theologians and philosophers in all of history. His story reminds us that no matter how stuck we feel, how deep in the pit we are, a moment of change can come when we least expect it, sometimes as simply as a child's voice in an open book. Scene: images of ancient Milan, perhaps the Basilica of Sant'Ambrogio. Gentle, reflective music plays. In the spring of 387 AD, a momentous event unfolded in Milan, one that would echo through the corridors of history. Augustine, the brilliant but restless professor of rhetoric, stood before Ambrose, the city's revered bishop. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a profound transformation. As the waters of baptism washed over him, Augustine felt the weight of his past 33 years lift. The life of ambition, of worldly desires, of intellectual pride and personal turmoil, it was all washed away. A new life, one dedicated to a higher purpose, had just begun. For years, his mother, Monica, had prayed ceaselessly for this very moment. Her tears, her hopes, her unwavering faith had followed him from North Africa to Rome, and finally to Milan. Now, her prayers were answered in the most beautiful way imaginable. Her son, once lost in a maze of philosophies and self-indulgence, had found his way home, not just to his faith, but to himself. Having witnessed this miracle, it was as if her life's mission was complete. Shortly after his baptism, while preparing to return to Africa with him, Monica fell ill and passed away peacefully, her heart filled with joy and contentment. Scene: visuals shift to the shores of North Africa, Tagaste. The music becomes more hopeful and serene. The death of his mother was a deep sorrow for Augustine, yet it was tempered by the peace of her fulfilled life. He had planned to return to Africa with her, but now he returned with a different kind of companion, a new, unshakable purpose. He didn't go back to Carthage to reclaim his old post or seek greater fame in the intellectual circles he once dominated. The allure of worldly success had lost its grip on him. Instead, he returned to his small hometown of Tagaste. There, he sold his family estate and gave the proceeds to the poor. He wasn't seeking a stage or an audience anymore. He sought a quiet life of service, study, and contemplation. Along with a few close friends, he established a small lay community, a sort of monastic brotherhood dedicated to prayer and the study of Scripture. This was a radical departure from his former life. The man who once chased applause in the grand halls of Milan now sought solitude and fellowship in a humble corner of the Roman Empire. This return to Africa wasn't an end, but a new beginning. It was in this quiet, unassuming setting that Augustine would lay the foundations for his future work. He began to write, not to win debates, but to explore the depths of his newfound faith. His mind, once a tool for worldly ambition, was now consecrated to understanding God and the human soul. He was no longer Augustine the rhetorician, but Augustine the servant. This period of quiet reflection, however, was not destined to last. God had other plans for this brilliant mind and transformed heart. A trip to the nearby port city of Hippo Regis would unexpectedly change the course of his life once more. He went simply to visit a friend and perhaps start another small monastic community. But the people of Hippo, hearing that the famous Augustine was in their midst, had a different idea. Scene: depictions of the bustling city of Hippo, a Christian basilica. And music swells slightly. During a church service, the congregation, in desperate need of a priest, literally seized him. They surrounded him, shouting for him to be ordained. Despite his tears and protests, he felt utterly unworthy and unprepared for such a role. The crowd's will prevailed. The elderly bishop, Valerius, consented. Augustine, who had sought a life of quiet contemplation, was suddenly thrust into the very heart of church leadership. He was ordained a priest against his will, a testament to the community's desperate need and their recognition of his unique gifts. This wasn't the life he had chosen after his baptism, but it was the life that had chosen him. From this unexpected and reluctant start, Augustine would rise to become the Bishop of Hippo, one of the most influential theologians, writers, and pastors the world has ever known. His journey from a restless seeker to a humble servant, and finally to a foundational leader of the church, shows that sometimes our greatest calling is found not in what we plan for ourselves, but in what we humbly accept in service to others. His new life in Africa, born from the waters of baptism, became a beacon of light for centuries to come. From the heart of a small North African town, a new voice began to resonate throughout the Christian world. Augustine, once a man chasing fleeting pleasures, was now a priest, and soon after, the Bishop of Hippo. This wasn't a quiet, ceremonial role. Augustine was a spiritual warrior, a shepherd fiercely protecting his flock. He took to the pulpit with passion, his sermons captivating and convicting. He picked up his pen and wrote tirelessly, his words becoming weapons in the defense of faith against the rising tides of heresy. He wasn't just refuting false ideas. He was building a theological fortress that would stand for ages. Augustine delved into the deepest questions of the human soul and its relationship with God. He taught about grace, that unearned, transformative gift from God that redeems us. He explored the nature of sin, not to condemn, but to reveal our desperate need for a Savior. He wrestled with the paradox of free will and the absolute sovereignty of God. His body perished, his words, his ideas, his spirit proved immortal. His influence is almost impossible to overstate. His theological framework became a cornerstone of Catholic tradition for over 1,000 years. Then, centuries later, Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin would rediscover his writings on grace and sin, and these ideas would ignite the Protestant Reformation. From ancient Rome to the modern world, his thoughts continue to challenge, inspire, and illuminate Christian thought across the globe. The story of Augustine is the ultimate comeback story. A man once lost in a sea of sin, a restless heart searching everywhere for truth, was found by God and transformed into a lighthouse. A beacon of wisdom and faith whose light has guided countless souls through the storms of life. Imagine this. The year is 430 AD. The city of Hippo is surrounded, under siege by the Vandals. Inside the walls, a great mind is fading. Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, lies on his deathbed. As the world he knew was crumbling, his physical life came to an end. But that wasn't the end of his story. In fact, it was just the beginning of his true legacy. His body may have been laid to rest, but his words, his ideas, they refused to die. They traveled far beyond the besieged walls of Hippo. Think about it. This one man's theological insights became the bedrock for so much of Western thought. His writings were so profound, they helped shape the very core of Catholic tradition for centuries. But it didn't stop there. Over 1,000 years later, when the winds of change blew through Europe during the Protestant Reformation, leaders like Martin Luther and John Calvin looked back to Augustine. They found in his writings a powerful echo of their own calls for faith and grace. From Catholicism to Protestantism, his influence created ripples that turned into waves, shaping Christian thought across the entire globe. Isn't it incredible? A man who once described himself as lost, entangled in sin, and searching desperately for meaning, became a spiritual lighthouse. His personal struggles and his profound discovery of faith shone a light that has guided countless others through their own dark nights of the soul for over 1,600 years. He's a testament to the idea that no one is too lost to be found, and that a transformed life can, in turn, transform the world. Augustine penned one of the most famous lines in all of Christian literature. "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. That single sentence captures his entire journey. The restlessness he felt in his youth, the search for truth in philosophies and worldly pleasures, all of it was a deep-seated longing for God. His story isn't just a dusty piece of history. It's a living, breathing invitation to all of us. It's an invitation to examine our own restless hearts. What are we searching for? Where are we trying to find our peace? Augustine's life points to an answer. A restless heart finally finds its rest in God. His journey from confusion to clarity, from brokenness to wholeness, is a powerful reminder that our own search for meaning can lead us to a place of profound peace and purpose. If this story of a restless heart finding its home has resonated with you, I'd love for you to join our community. Please consider subscribing to the channel to explore more stories like this one. If you found value in this video, hitting the like button really helps others find it too. And if you know someone who's on their own search for truth, maybe share this video with them. It might be the encouragement they need to hear today. Thank you so much for watching.